So welcome to Teaching to Converted. This is a new podcast put together by a couple of teachers, hopefully for the interest of students, educators, teachers, researchers, anyone with a passing interest in education. So I'm Sam.
And I'm James.
And together we've got about 10 plus years of experience across the state and the private sector. And we have a whole range of interests in teaching education, creativity, design in education, and a whole bunch more besides. So in this week's episode of Teaching to the Converted, we are going to begin to tackle all the different kind of compulsory teaching standards that the standard UK teacher doing their PGCE is going to encounter as they're gathering evidence for their qualification. And number one is setting high expectations which inspire, motivate, and challenge pupils.
Yeah, a really good one. I think it's one of 8, and it links quite well in with other standards as well. So the system used to be a stupid number, didn't it?
It used to be, yeah. It used to be like, what, 34, 36 standards long, really niche, obscure things to try and evidence. And it just became a paper chase, which I think is probably why they simplified it down to these kind of core 8. And you've got some to do with lesson planning and teaching, and you've got some that are a bit broader and kind of bleed into all aspects of school life. And I think this, I suppose, is one of them.
This is one of the broader ones, yeah.
Yeah, if you're setting high expectations, that covers such a range of things in your lessons and outside of your lessons.
Exactly. So if you expect high expectations of behavior, for example, then that is important in a classroom, and it's also important on a football pitch. It's important walking down a corridor. It's important at lunchtime. It's important all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on what we mean by high expectations, because that could be behavioral, like you say. That could be to do with attainment as well. That could be to do with effort. There's a range of things that this can apply to. So they've kind of kept it purposefully broad, so you can kind of read into it what you want to some extent. They do give a bit of guidance. So underneath, set high expectations, inspire, motivate, challenge pupils. They do give a little bit more explanations. They say that we should be establishing a safe and stimulating environment for pupils, rooted in mutual respect. We should set goals that stretch and challenge pupils of all backgrounds, abilities, and dispositions, and demonstrate consistently the positive attitudes, values, and behavior which are expected of pupils.
Yeah, when I first looked at this, I immediately thought back. I'd recently watched the film Coach Carter. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yeah, I think I have. Samuel L. Jackson, right?
Samuel L. Jackson, yeah. He's got this basketball team in like a rough inner city school, and by setting high expectations of them, he turns this basketball team. Obviously, it's meant to be one of these sort of cliche sports films that we all love so much, but it does summarize this up quite well, I think. So goal setting is important. If you set goals of students that are sensible, but at the same time push them to beyond what they thought they could do, then they're going to aim for that. I think that is the sort of backbone of the whole standard, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I suppose for new teachers coming into this, to set high expectations, I mean, do you even know what your expectations in the classroom are? Because in theory, they're going to differ from teacher to teacher, subject to subject. Some things are going to remain the same, but if you're kind of ironing out your own style, there could be, a lot of variation there in what your high expectations are compared to what somebody else's high expectations are.
Exactly. I teach a class, an A-level physics class, when I do half the lessons a week, and another teacher does half the lessons a week, and that can be interesting with regards to what their expectations are compared to what my expectations are. And the students can become a little bit confused just because different teachers have different norms of what they expect. And in some areas I'll expect more, and in some areas the other teacher will expect more. And it's not necessarily always super consistent.
Gotcha. Absolutely. And it can be difficult, especially when you're sharing a class, if you and the teacher you're sharing a class with have the kind of different ways of approaching teaching. So for instance, I remember sharing a class where I was big into technology and interactive things like that, and using the kids' iPads and all the rest of it, and OneNote, and getting it all digital. And the other teacher just would not have it. There was very much, no devices, they're a distraction, get your pen and paper out. And oh my goodness, trying to manage that class and trying to keep on the same page was really, really difficult. It's quite tough to have your own style and kind of bend and bow to other people's as well. So, I mean, if it's tough for us as teachers, it is very, very tough if you're a student in the middle of that.
Exactly. And was that, if you don't mind me asking, was that during your PGCE?
That was during my PGCE, yeah.
So you were definitely the junior member of that partnership as well, which
Yeah, a little bit. And when you've got that teacher who's been there forever, and there's new technology coming in, and they don't necessarily want a part of it because they've worked out what works for them, which is fine. It can be a little bit stifling.
yeah, yeah. Expectations are everywhere. So, interesting point then. Nature versus nurture.
Mm.
We have different expectations of different pupils. Where do we get those from, do you think?
That's a tough one. So I suppose to some extent it depends on the information you get about the student. I know there's been a bit of research into the data and the information that teachers receive, and therefore the kind of idea that they build up of the students in their classes. So you were mentioning before, I think, a really good example of students with dyslexia, for instance, and as soon as you know they've got dyslexia, you might be reluctant to call on them for answers or to read in front of a class or to communicate in that way. You might kind of steer away from them a little bit for fear of putting them on the spot and leaving them uncomfortable.
Yeah, you'll change your expectations, and arguably rightly so, of someone with dyslexia to veer away from speaking in front of the class. But then on the other hand, are you introducing a situation where they're going to have less practice at reading, despite the fact that they are the person that needs it most? And that this I wasn't expecting, to be honest, to end up down a deeper rabbit hole as I did with this one. We did a little bit of research, and there's all sorts on this. Which, or again, for the second episode in a row, I'm already glad that I'm doing this. It was worthwhile just for the amount of reading I got to do.
It's already paying off. It's already paying dividends.
It was worth it. Already worth it. Even if it all goes to pot from here and we end up doing the worst podcast ever, I'll still be glad that I did it.
It'll still be worth it. So in terms of how expectations are formed, there are definitely some kind of, I suppose, inappropriate expectations that come up. So there's a few papers that talk about not judging students based on the type of school they come from, so whether it's suburban or whether it's rural, whether it's in a city. What do the students look like? What's their appearance? What's their race? What's their socioeconomic status? What's their gender? All this sort of stuff that can jade a teacher's views. It shouldn't do, ideally. You shouldn't be prejudiced against your own students. However, evidence suggests that in the past it has creeped in a little bit. So, I mean, For me, certainly when I go into class, it's as blank a slate as I can get. I just mix the kids up, try and learn the names as quick as I can, and I just kind of take them as I see them.
Yes.
That's been my approach, I suppose. I don't know if you do something similar.
Yeah, you try your best, don't you? You try your best. And I know that I've spoken to teachers before who specifically do not want a handover when they're picking up a class. So from the last teacher that taught the class, they don't want to know anything about the students. They want a completely blank slate. And then there are other teachers who want to know as much in detail as they can to make the transition as smooth as possible. But then your opinion is going to be tainted by the other teacher's opinions. And those opinions can come from academic ability, a feel of IQ, which is important. But at the same time, you don't want them to have had a bad relationship with a student, have that bleed into their expectations of that student, and therefore bleed into your expectations. So yeah, again, there's two sides to every coin with this.
I'd agree with that, and I feel like, especially if you're handing a class over to someone, as an example, if a kid's changing set, or if you're kind of finishing off in one placement and handing it back to somebody else, it's really, really important that you don't jade the other teacher's view, because it's to some extent unfair on the child. I mean, you might have had an absolute nightmare of a session with that child for months and months and months, but it might be that he or she is good as gold for the other teacher. Maybe their teaching style or their behavior management or whatever it is just really appeals to the kid. So there is a danger in saying, oh, little Dave at the back of the room, he was awful for me all year. Really don't sit him near X, Y, and Z student. Keep him away from all of those. When in reality, he might thrive. He might be absolutely fine. You don't know because you're not the other teacher in the other classroom. So it's a really, really subjective thing.
Exactly. Students, and I'm glad they are really complex things. They can keep you guessing forever. But that's what makes the jobs interesting in my mind. That's what makes it worth doing. Every day is a little bit different because you never quite work it out.
Yeah, you get a little bit closer. You get a bit of a better feel for what the kid's about, or what they know, or what they don't know, or what their strengths are, their weaknesses. But you never really know. I mean, they still surprise you even to the end. And I think that's the key thing, is being open to wiping the slate clean. You had a bad lesson, next one will be better, and just giving them the opportunity to meet the high expectations that you're trying to set. If you go straight in there with a low expectation of that child because of how they behave or the scruffiness of their written work or whatever it is, you're already doing them a bit of a disservice, aren't you?
Yes. I read a paper where it said the best schools and the best teachers in terms of expectations are the ones that are flexible, and their expectations of a student when they start teaching them might be different from the expectations at the end. And I don't know if you've ever had this where you've been teaching a class and they do some baseline data testing,
Mm-hmm.
and that is almost a work of fiction with some students. I don't know where they got those numbers from. You'll have had it where you're teaching a GCSE class and you have a student that's predicted a 9 despite the fact they're going to get nowhere near a 9. What effect do you think that has?
I think that's a really tough one, isn't it? Because I think to some extent, those tests aren't always representative. They give you maybe a ballpark figure, a general idea of what the student could achieve. But I mean, doing a multiple choice general knowledge quiz or whatever baseline testing you opt for isn't going to reflect, how well they can analyze a poem or how well they can evaluate some results or some charts or some graphs. It's not that simple at all.
No.
So you end up with these really high expectations from the outset. You think this is going to be a really bright student, for instance, and then it sometimes just doesn't manifest. And what do you do then? Do your expectations drop? Do you keep trying to hold them to that high standard? Is that an unfair amount of pressure to put on them? I think you're right. You have to be adaptable.
Yeah, I'd say personally, I had a student last year who was predicted an 8, and he was never going to get an 8, bless him. And it's not because he was painfully unintelligent or painfully lazy or anything else. It's just that that test wasn't a fair reflection of his natural ability in the subject. So we quickly readjusted our expectations there. Though I did leave the caveat that if he did manage to get the 8, I would take his entire class to Nando's.
Did they go to Nando's?
Nobody went to Nando's. He argued that because he got a 4 instead of an 8, he should have gone to McDonald's. But it didn't do any favors to my value added, which I think is another important point, because these expectations that are made of students, even though we can pick up quite quickly and can be flexible on how realistic those expectations are, the school that you're working at won't necessarily do the same.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to some extent, that adds a lot of pressure onto a child. So he, for instance, had that pressure, whether he felt it or not, I don't know, to achieve the 7s, the 8s, the 9s, the high scores. And what does that do to a student that we're expecting they will achieve a minimum amount? And what happens when they don't achieve that? Is that a bit of a toxic expectation to have?
I think that over expecting of a student and seeing them fail to reach that expectation time after time can only have a negative effect. The way I understand expectations is it's all about the student's perceived sense of self-efficacy. So their ability to look at a task and say, am I able to complete this task? And then if they do complete it, that affects their confidence. So it's all about having this confidence to complete a subject, and confidence, as we know, is a great motivator. If someone's confident in an area, they're more likely to pursue it properly and have some kind of resilience when they're coming up against difficulties. But if you've got a student who is consistently falling short of our expectations, and that's not because they didn't try, if you've got a student who's working the backside off and falling short of those fictional target grades that we're talking about, that will affect their confidence and therefore affect their motivation.
I agree with that. And to some extent, that bleeds into everything you do in the classroom as well, because this standard, setting high expectations, falls in really nicely with differentiation as well, which is, I think, standard 5. Yes, which is how you've... Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. Well, we'll find out when we get to episode 5 or 6.
It is. I just checked. It is.
It definitely is. So I feel like, you're in the classroom, you're giving a task for them. You're saying, I expect you to be able to do this task. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I expect you to know the answer.
Yeah.
Because then you're not challenging them. And if anything, that's too low an expectation. I don't want to go in there and say, here's a whole bunch of questions you already know the answer to. I want to go in there and say, this is new material. I don't expect you to have the answer, but I expect that you'll be able to work through it to get to the answer. My expectation is that, with hard work, by applying yourself, have some efficacy about you, you will be able to do this. And I think that's where the confidence is built. Not in having the right answer, but in the process of getting to it.
Exactly. It's that Vygotsky zone of proximal development, isn't it?
Yeah,
That,
absolutely.
that you learn about. I quite like to teach the kids about that zone of proximal development, especially when I'm teaching maths. I'll say to them, okay, here is something we've just learned about. I'd like you to practice that. I want you to find your zone of proximal development. And they're quite good at it now. They've had a little bit of training. They'll find the question because they'll start at question one if you don't say this, and the question one's too easy for them.
Yeah.
This just happens to be a top set that I teach. So if they start at question one, they're almost wasting their time because it's too simple. That said, there are some students in the class who should start at question one, and they do because I give them the opportunity to. But if you say to them, find your zone of proximal development, they will scroll through the questions until they see something that they think they could do but would be a challenge, and then they start there.
Mm,
And that,
absolutely.
like you say, grows their confidence. It allows them to learn, more importantly.
Yeah, yeah, and to be honest, that isn't to say that there's any harm in doing questions 1 through 10 if they're easy. If it's revision a couple of weeks before an exam, even my top set kids, I really want them to do the easy questions because that's where they drop marks. They forever overcomplicate it or take for granted, oh, it's dead easy, so we'll just take this fact for granted, and they just miss detail that the examiner could be giving them marks for.
It's
Um,
true.
so I'm happy with them doing that if it's a revision activity, but if it's new material and we're trying to grow some understanding and we're trying to push them and trying to see what they can really kind of achieve, then yeah, I feel like skip through 1 through 10, go for the challenge. We'll set that high expectation. We'll see where they're comfortable working. There's plenty of time when it comes to revision to just bang out a whole bunch of the easier questions, and just get those foundations really, really solid before you go in.
Exactly. And that's where it comes into challenging pupils. You need to make sure that everyone in your class is challenged. And again, we're dropping now into standard 5, but you'll have taught mixed ability classes.
Yeah, absolutely. To some extent, I think I prefer them to. I mean, where I'm at the moment is all setted. Where I was before this was all mixed, and to
Yeah.
some extent, I quite like the mixed approach.
Yeah, having taught both, I do quite like the mixed approach as well, because to a lesser extent they're all measuring against one another.
Mm.
But then at the same time, if you have some people in the class who have like really high expectations, should be going on to study it, at A level, get really top grades, and then you have some other people in the class whose targets are get a minimum pass if we can. Then I believe there's a study that says that acts to reduce the motivation of the weaker students because they can see how far behind they are from the other students, and you know,
Interesting.
and it's so complicated at the end of the day, isn't it? It's human psychology. People are very complex.
Yeah, and that's strange as well, because if you ever look on the Education Endowment Fund's website, they aggregate all this evidence from all these papers, and they kind of suggest that setting the students has a negative effect in terms of progress to the tune of a month or two's progress.
Yeah,
So it's interesting that motivation might be lower, but attainment might be higher. So the
yeah,
students might not necessarily enjoy being there, and in terms of their kind of motivation to do it, it might be quite low, but they're somehow coming out better than if they were setted with people of similar ability. It's a strange one.
yeah. It is strange, and it seems that for everything that you read, there's a sort of a
Yeah,
counter piece of
absolutely.
research, so it can be difficult to get an aggregate feel of what the best practice is for a lot of things.
And that's, yeah, I think to some extent that's probably the problem as we're going to find as we go through these episodes, is that so much of educational research is trying to model itself on scientific research, but it's a very subjective field.
Yeah,
So a lot of this is anecdotal. A lot of these studies are always done with a group of 30 students in one school in one place in the Midwest of America or whatever it is, and it's really, really niche.
yeah,
So you kind of have to take it with a pinch of salt. You can't look at it like a science. There are things you can take, things you should leave, things you can fit into your teaching style, things that you'll run a mile from because they're not for you. So it is, like you say, it's a balancing act. It's really tough to actually work out what's going to work.
exactly. Your best bet is to try it and see.
Yeah, pretty much, especially early in your career where you can get away with making mistakes.
Yeah,
Um, we'll absolutely try and see.
yeah. Because we were talking about, you know, studies, and sometimes there are defects in the studies. It might be a nice little segue into the Pygmalion effect. What do you think?
Yeah, I reckon. Go for it.
Okay, so the Pygmalion effect is, well, it was originally named after a piece of Greek mythology where Pygmalion was a sculptor, and he made a statue of a woman that was so beautiful he fell in love with her, and no woman he ever met could contend with this statue that he'd made until his feelings were so strong that she became a real life woman and he married her and she was the woman of his dreams. Obviously, I doubt that's a true story.
This seems way too happy and positive for Greek mythology.
Yeah, usually.
At what point do the gods smite him down?
As far as I'm aware, they don't. It's just a happy story where it's like a cross between Pinocchio and falling in love with a statue, I feel.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. But the link to that is if you set high expectations, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is what the Pygmalion effect talks about. Bob Rosenthal, and his colleague did a study in a school to try and link expectations to performance, and there'll be a link for this in the description of the podcast. And what they found was, well, what they did, first of all, is they said that they'd done some test that predicted how much a student would progress over a period of time. They did do a test, but in no way predicted this. And then they told the teachers about 20 students who would improve rapidly over the next 12 months. And they gave that information to the teachers. They didn't give it to the students. And then a year later, they came back to see the progress that those students had made. And they'd all, to a man, pretty much improved their performance from where they were at the start of the year.
So let me get this straight. Let me see if I can explain it, if this is what you're saying. So take a bunch of students, give them a mock test or whatever. It really doesn't matter what it is. We're going to randomize them anyway. And then give that group to a teacher and say, hey, they've done this test and they're smashing it. They're going to be absolutely great. Their results are going to be through the roof. They are ready to learn.
Yeah.
Is that okay? And then it turns out that they're the ones who achieve quite well.
Yes. Yeah. So you'd think then from that setting high expectations almost by magic increases the grades of your students. If by simply the process of having high expectations will improve their grades, is what you'd think from that study, isn't it?
It seems a little bit magical. It seems a little bit far-fetched, doesn't it? I imagine as well, this works the opposite way. You take a group of students, you say, yeah, these guys aren't that bright. They're not so great. I imagine their grades are going to be dropping.
Yes, I don't think they've ever done that as a study because it would be highly unethical. These students are thickies and then their grades drop, and as a result they go through their whole lives failing as a result of your study. I don't think it'd go that well. But the process, the one that they did do with students increasing their grades, there was, I believe, now I'm no expert, but I believe there was a little bit of an issue with the study, and that issue was the fact that the reason their grades improved and the reason that high expectations made a difference is because the teachers put more resources, more time, met them outside of class, did extra work, set extra questions for those students as opposed to the other students, which is what affected their grades. And more interestingly, 12 months after they'd finished the study, the students were almost exactly where they were before they started.
Interesting. That's crazy.
Yeah, so it just shows that the mechanism of setting high expectations, while setting high expectations is undoubtedly important and does have an effect, it's more complex than that because it's not because by simply the virtue of setting high expectations these students improved. It was because the teachers were putting more resources in. Now, if we set high expectations of all our students, we're putting more time and effort into all the students, and as a result, you're not really putting any extra time and effort into any of the students, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're not exactly singling some out, which to some extent, I guess, is what you're after. You don't want to single someone out and invest 90% of your effort in them and allow every other student to just go by the wayside because you feel they wouldn't have achieved much anyway, so we'll just leave them to it, because that seems also highly unethical.
Yeah, I'd say it was, yeah.
I would say it is probably, not great teaching. I would not say that you're evidencing the standard well if you're dedicating 90% of your time to 10% of your students.
Exactly. But
it's interesting, isn't it? So you can't just stand at the front and say, I demand better, my expectations are high, because that's not actually going to do anything.
No.
It's the little things day to day that you do in order to demonstrate your high expectations. It's showing up after class for some sort of revision clinic. It's getting them to come in early to go over a problem that they didn't know about. It's all those little things. The kind of feedback you give. Are you just going to tick it, or are you going to spend an extra 5 minutes actually, with some follow-up questions or with, really picking apart a point that they didn't understand to make sure they get it.
Exactly. And it ties back into the standard in the first place, because one of the substandards says demonstrate consistently the positive attitudes, values, and behavior which are expected of pupils. So that demonstrate says that the teacher is a role model in that situation.
Mm.
And if you can be seen to be the person who says, expect better, and that you see it, they see you working to expect better of them and to expect better almost of yourself, that will help as well.
Interesting. So I feel like I've got a question. Well, I've got two questions that I'm going to give you as one question.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it just goes around this idea of being a role model as a teacher. So first of all, how have you got in the habit of setting your expectations and kind of and communicating that to the pupils? But then beyond that, because we've said that, doesn't necessarily work in the long run, how do you actually go about executing them?
For me, I like to set my expectations through one-on-one sort of quiet conversations, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. I thought you were going to do something really rogue like interpretive dance, but that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I like to paint it across their skin in the form of a tattoo. No,
that's certainly permanent. That really sets high expectations.
They're never going to forget. Let's put it that way. They're never going to forget. But yeah, for me, it's I can sit down with a student and say, at the minute you're here. Realistically, you know as well as I do that you can do better than that. Or I can say to a student, listen, at the minute you are performing brilliantly. I'm really happy with how you're getting on. And that I think has as much of an effect as forever telling them they can do more. In fact, I think it has a much bigger effect.
Yeah, I feel like I for one do not do that enough. There's plenty of times where I say, this could be improved, that could be improved, this could be a little bit better. It's not very often that I say, actually, you know what? You nailed that. That was great. You have met my expectation. Good job. Just keep performing at this level. We're always looking to be that bit critical, aren't we? Maybe we shouldn't be.
Push them. Have you ever seen the film Whiplash?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I think
J.K. Simmons.
That's a great film, one of my favorites. But I think that ties in quite well with this, in that he's always expecting more. And the quote is, "There are no two words more damaging in the English language than good job." And I think that's unfair, because I think that good job, when someone's really worked hard and achieved something really good, you can see the effect that it has. I had it today. I had a student who, between two tests, went from a level 3 to a level 8 in physics.
That's phenomenal, isn't it? Because I suppose in old money, a 3 is kind of a fail. It's a D, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas an 8 is an A star.
A star, bottom end of an A star. Yeah, she really, really smashed it. And we knew she was bright, and I had higher expectations of her than that, and she had higher expectations, more importantly, of herself than that. And she went away refusing to accept that she was a level 3 student, knowing that she was much better than that, and got a level 8. And then at a departmental meeting, we said any students who should come up for praise, and I mentioned this girl's name. She was the only girl that I mentioned, actually. I mean, praise only goes to the worthy in that respect. You have to increase by 5 grades between 2 tests if I'm going to give you any praise. But she was the only name that I mentioned, and when I told her that, I went back to her and said, "Can I just say, we had a departmental meeting, and yours was the only name that I brought up with regards to, this huge improvement." And you could see on her face it meant the world to her. And she went out of that room feeling, she went out of the room feeling like £1 million. And I think that when we talk about setting high expectations, if they meet your high expectations, they should know that they're meeting yours and their high expectations, and the confidence they can get from that is almost the most important thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a similar story with a student who a couple of weeks ago was bumbling around the bottom of the class with 2s and 3s and 4s and things, and he could have done a lot better. And then he got a test back and he got something like 70 or 80%. He'd done the same. He jumped up to kind of a level 7 in A grade, but he was comparing it to other people in the class, and he was still grumbling, "Oh, I'm still failing. I'm not that good. I'm not as good as them." I'd say, well, hold on a minute. Don't set your expectations in comparison to them. What they get on their test is like nothing to do with you. You're not going to be opening their results at the end of your GCSEs. It doesn't matter what they got. How did you do last time? How did you do this time? So he actually pulled his grades up. He looked at his last grade. He's like, "Oh, I got 38% or whatever. How do you this time?" "I got 69, 70, 71%. well, there you go. You just jumped up 40% in a couple of weeks. Keep
Yeah.
at it. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Focus on your own game. Focus on what you're doing. I said to him, you might not have met your expectations because you're setting it based on what your peers are getting, but you've met mine. You've exceeded mine. Now we can reset. Now we can see what you can achieve when you work. How can we set those expectations that bit higher, that bit higher, that bit higher? So you're always having something to strive for till we get you absolutely, there with your peers, happy and content with your own expectations for yourself.
I feel like that's a good point. When the students start comparing their expectations with the expectations of other people in their class, that's when things can start getting a little bit toxic. I teach a student who, if he absolutely smashes it, if he does really, really well, he might be able to get a pass grade at GCSE. And it's about making sure that he and that for him to achieve that would be a huge, huge achievement for him. There are some students that you teach who'll breeze a level 9 at GCSE. They'll do no revision, and they'll just happen to have an IQ that allows them to rock up to the exam having done, next to no work and just breeze a 9. But then there are some students who work every second of every day, and they have that academic resilience. They work their backside off, but they're not that bright.
And I suppose there is that argument of, can you work smarter, can you work hard? And arguably, as you might call them, the brighter students, I guess, are the ones who can work smart, and they will get more done in 20 minutes because of the way in which they tackle a problem and the way in which they think than some students could do in 1, 2, 3 hours.
Yeah.
Depending on the strategies that they have access to.
And the strategies they're willing to use as well. I have a student who works every hour that God sends. When he was doing his GCSEs, he was staying up way past bedtime, but he was just sat there with a textbook open in front of him. It was just like, if you could just do it better, this would be so much more worth your time.
Yeah, just sitting there rereading, highlighting, rereading. It's not gonna. I mean, it'll get you somewhere, I guess. You'll know a lot of facts eventually. Some of it's gonna stick. But you could use that time a lot more effectively. The way in which you learn, just like you can learn some physics or you can learn some biology, our subjects, you can learn how to learn better, which I think is probably a good topic for a different podcast.
Yeah.
But worth touching on here, in the idea that students can expect better of themselves if they've got strategies to achieve better. If all you can do is sit in front of the textbook and absorb a little bit, you're not going to do very well in the long run. And
you'll smash the state questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Those describe questions maybe, but when it gets to explain, evaluate, discuss, like you're out of your depth.
Yeah.
And I think that then jades the students' expectations of themselves. They become, the student who can't do it or the student who doesn't get it, as opposed to the student who just needs to change their angle of approach.
Exactly. And those students will have very high expectations of their work ethic, and then would expect that to marry up to the expectations of their performance compared to the other people in their class.
Absolutely. And it is that idea, I suppose, maybe there's a little bit to be said there on action and intention, because their intention is to work really hard to achieve really well, and their action is to actually employ a revision tactic that isn't that effective, and they unfortunately reap the rewards of that, which aren't very many.
Yeah, exactly.
But I suppose to some extent that's also, are they comfortable getting out of their comfort zone? Because the idea here is set high expectations, sure, but high expectations which inspire, motivate, challenge. So some students are afraid of the challenge. They like their comfort zone. They need to be inspired. They need to be motivated to get out of that comfort zone into that zone of proximal development where they are a little bit unsure and they are a little bit challenged and they are having to employ some new skills and new abilities.
I've got a good question for you.
Go on.
Talking about their motivating and resilience, what is the one thing that you've ever done which required the most resilience?
The one thing I've done that required the most resilience? As in, I'm trying to think of, like, just in my life in general?
Yeah, so think about a time, because I'm just trying to, the question that, basically the angle I'm trying to take is, where do we learn resilience? Because I feel like it is a skill, and I feel like students don't have that. As soon as it gets difficult, they back out. They turn down the difficulty setting.
Interesting.
So
I
where
think
do
for
we learn
me,
that? Mm.
I think there's a few different places you can learn it. The one that I'm going to go for, which I guess is a bit niche, and by all means agree or disagree, is I played a lot of games growing up. I played a lot of. Hear me out. Hear me out. I played a lot of board games. I played a lot of video games, games, strategy games especially. And when you put yourself in an environment like that, where there are rules and constraints and challenges and opponents and unknowns, and that's kind of an environment that you enjoy, you have to have resilience because things are going to act against you and things aren't going to work, and you are going to have to come up with plan A, B, C, D, whatever. I think whatever the situation is, if it breeds that sort of environment, you're going to develop some grit and some resilience. Now, that could be board games and video games. That could be doing D&D and getting yourself lost with a map and a compass, and you're in that same position where things are against you. Plan A didn't work. It's plan B or lose, plan B or get cold. I think that sort of environment, whether that is at home or whether that's at school or whether that's with your friendship group, I think that's the sort of thing that might breed resilience, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking when I was thinking about this morning. I thought, what's the one thing that I can think of in my entire life? When you put aside PGCs and other obvious difficult things, I remember playing. I don't know if you ever played it, Kingdom Hearts. Did you ever play that game?
I'm familiar with Kingdom Hearts, a little bit of sorry, yeah.
Yeah, there's a boss on that towards the end of the game. Not even the final boss, and I must have tried 20, 30 times to try and do it. And it was one of those where I thought, I need to do this because I'm so close to the end of the game. I'm not going to quit now. And furthermore, I've completed on this quite high difficulty setting, and I'm not going to turn it down. I'm no coward. I'm no quitter. I've got to do this. And I was wondering, where do students get that from these days?
Interesting. Well, I was going to say, to some extent, I feel like we've got rid of that from school life. So it's interesting. If you're doing an apprenticeship, let's say you were going to learn how to do bricklaying or be a sparky or something like that, you would see someone who's professionally trained do it. They'd say, okay, this is how you change the plug or whatever. Here we go. And then you would have a go. And it's either going to work or it ain't. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to do it again. And if it still doesn't work, you have to do it. And eventually you're going to have to change tact or get a bit more help. Or you're just going to fail and fail and fail. And that's you kind of done. At school, we don't have that. I feel like at school, if you fail a test, well, okay, you got 10%, but we've got to move on now. There's the next spec point to do. There's the next bit of the syllabus. We're onto a new chapter now. So that's gone. Now it's done. There's never that idea of like, the game ends. Just like you were saying with that boss fight. If you can't do it, the rest of the content is locked to you. If you can't do it, you can't do it. And you're not allowed to progress until you can prove that you can. And that, I think, develops resilience and develops grit. Whereas here, we're saying, do what you can do, but we're going to be moving on. So whether you get 10% or 100%, it's going to be left in the past until you come back to revision anyway.
Yeah, you're just going to have to hope it doesn't come up in the exam.
Kind of, yeah. Or you're going to have to make sure that you cover it in your own time because everyone else got it and you didn't, sort of thing. And I think maybe we've lost that. Maybe we're too flexible in just moving on without really making sure that a student has got the understanding and that they're really confident in it. Maybe our expectations there aren't right.
Yeah. It's interesting. You'll run a clinic for students to come back. We have one-to-one clinics sometimes. My general clinic, where any student can turn up, is so rarely attended, which I think speaks volumes to that resilience, because clinic works best for people who try something, a question in their own time, can't do it, try it again, still can't do it, go online, look up how to do it, find a YouTube video on it, and then eventually come to you. That is the best use of a clinic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like you get different audiences. So some weeks you get nobody, which is fine. You get an early finish, whatever, but there are people who need it. Some weeks you get that student who already knows this inside and out, and they're going to get a level 9, and they're just not, for some reason, confident. It's almost like, too much knowledge is a dangerous thing. Like, they know it all, but they now know so much that they know to question certain things, and they start to lack confidence.
Yeah.
So you've forever got students who really don't need to be there, who are going to be there anyway, which is fine. But the real students you need there, if they're going to show up, which is probably in the dying weeks of the course, just before the exam, they usually rock up and they go, "What are we doing today, sir?"
Yeah.
And you say, well, I don't know what we're doing today. What have you brought? What are you stuck with? That's the point of clinic. I don't go to the doctor and go, what are we going to look at today, doc?
Yeah.
I normally go in and go, I can't hear out of my left ear, and I've got shooting pains up this left side, and my tongue stick out left eye. I think I'm having a stroke. Normally, that's why I go in, not
Yeah.
because I just want to see what they think we should do today.
Yeah. I need help with that health. Anything you could help me out with it?
Yeah, exactly. Like people are telling me I'm not healthy, but I don't know why. Help.
Yeah.
People are telling me I don't get biology. I've got all these bad test scores, so help. And you just think, well, that's probably why you've got bad test scores. Is you've just signed yourself off with low expectations of saying I can't do this.
Yeah.
Or maybe you've had a teacher who has signed you off with low expectations and said, they won't get it. So I've got enough people getting my value added and getting my 8s, my 9s that they don't matter. That would be a shame if that was the case.
Yeah.
But you definitely see it from time to time. Some kids are just left by the wayside, which is a bit of a shame.
And the ones who are motivated and have that academic resilience and can stick at a problem until it's solved will invariably the ones, even if they don't do that well in school, they'll do well in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying bit by bit to breed that sort of thing, because one of the big things I'm interested in, which maybe we'll do an episode on in the future, is this gamification of learning. So how you can take video games, board games, that sort of approach, but actually get education out of it. Because, I mean, with the best will in the world, I've got 13-year-olds who can tell me everything about Fortnite and nothing about the inside of a cell. And that's because they're interested in just playing the game, playing with their friends. All the time is spent on the game. The more you know about it, the better you do. And how weird they don't appreciate sometimes that the more you know about something, the better you can do at it applies not just to video games, but also to life in the classroom, life in the workplace. The better you are at your job, the more you know about it, the more you can apply, the more strategies you've got, the better you're going to do.
Yeah.
If they dedicated that time to take an interest in what they were doing. And it can be tough because some of the stuff that they're doing is a bit dry sometimes, or it's not expressed in the most interesting way.
Yeah. And when you're saying about gamification, and we absolutely will do an episode on this, it's about putting it in a way where the students want to engage with it.
Yeah, it's certainly it's kind of to some extent manufacturing ways to engage students. That's
Yeah.
part of it. Part of it is to do with maintaining motivation when they're in, because one of the big problems with it is this idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. The idea that it's very extrinsically motivating. It's nice to get an achievement or some experience points, but intrinsically, like when it's done, and you go away from it. Or if you can't do it, you might leave it behind. If everyone's doing it, you might get on the hype, but you might have no drive to do it yourself. So getting that intrinsic motivation is quite tough. And there are ways to do it, which we'll perhaps take a look at. But in terms of gamification, to do this kind of, I suppose you'd call it teaching skills as opposed to teaching facts. I've put together this display board. I'm helping out with the medical society for the students who want to go off and do medicine at university.
Mm-hmm.
So I put together this medical display board, and one of the things on there is a manila folder that's made to kind of be a mock-up of an NHS style patient folder.
Mm-hmm.
And every month I put in there a new case study.
Okay.
And it's it'll be a fictitious A&E report, and it'll be some blood stats, and it'll be some tests or an X-ray or whatever. And I built this little case study around a disease or a condition, and they're all in there. And a student can take it and try and solve it, and they email me and say if they've solved it. I let them know if they're right or not. And if you work it out, great, good for you, well done. And if you don't, you don't. Just like in a video game and just like in real life, if you don't put the time into working it out, you don't get the answer at the end. You don't get that satisfaction. You don't get that little bit of learning. And I'm finding that students are enjoying the challenge and the puzzle. And when you say, actually, that diagnosis isn't right, they come back a few days later with something else. They're actually having another go and another go. They're not just having a go and then abandoning it.
Yeah, it's effectively like real life house, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah, that's kind of what I'm going for. But I'm not just giving out the answer. When they say, oh, is it asthma? I'm not saying, oh, actually, it's not asthma. It's X, Y, and Z. I'm saying, no, you're wrong. See you later.
Yeah, try again.
Yeah, and I've done these classes, these prospective medical students, where you try and introduce them to something like, I don't know, problem-based learning. If you're going to go off to a PBL university, you might as well have a taste for it to see what you're getting yourself in for, and you can work as a team and identify what you're going to learn, all the rest of it. It's amazing how quickly some of them just switch off.
Yeah,
it's amazing how you put the symptoms of this case up on the board. And you say this is the patient that we've got, and they'll say, oh, that's arthritis. And you go, actually, it's not. There's a few reasons why it might not be. You might want to research that, and they'll have maybe another guess. Oh, it's osteoporosis. Oh, it's actually not. It's not, guys. and then they just stop. And you say, "What are you up to?" And like, "Oh, I don't know it. Don't know it." It's like, well, yeah, of course you don't know it because you're not a doctor. But people don't just magically become doctors. You're gonna have to go away and learn it because potentially you have a patient here.
Yeah.
You can't just give up. Some of these careers that people go into, whether it's medicine or engineering or something like that, you can't just give up with a problem.
No, I know. And I had a friend, well, I say a friend, I have a colleague who said the other day that they're going to get a tattoo on their chest of all the former students they've taught who went on to do medicine who they don't want operating on them.
Oh, I can think of a few of those.
It's just like, whatever happens, this person is not to touch me. Same as like if you get on a flight and you hear a former student's name is going to be the pilot, you're like, actually, I've got other things that I need to do. I just remembered.
I would like to disembark now.
Yeah, I'm out. I'm out. Whatever this is, I'm out.
Absolutely. So I feel like, I suppose to some extent that's part of it is when we talk about inspiring, motivating, challenging pupils, it goes beyond what you say to them. So there is that element of praising a student. There is, I'll stand up when I get a new class at the start of the year. I'll stand up at the front and I'll say, this is what I expect. And normally it's a little list of how I operate. It's a little list of, we're going to have fun. It's going to be engaging. You're going to, sometimes struggle to find the line between settling down and listening and actually being enthusiastic and being a bit boisterous. There is a line and we'll find it. And you go through these expectations. I don't want to see first draft work, for instance. I don't necessarily, I'm not saying I want work to be perfect because I have different expectations for different students. But one expectation I share for all of them is you can do the work and before you submit it, you can look at it again.
Yeah.
You can
so much to ask.
Exactly. And to some extent, that's just a really easy thing to get in the habit of that any student can do. Just cast your eye over it for 5 minutes. Just read what you wrote. Did you spell that word right? Is that as detailed as it could be? Can you even read your own writing? Did you use a ruler? Really basic stuff, just so it's not first draft. And that allows you to have different expectations of the students, but also gives some parity, gives some understanding. They all know where they stand there because they can all just spend that 5 minutes casting their eye over. And the brighter students will see more and they'll correct more. And perhaps the lower achieving students might just think, oh, I should probably have underlined that. And they'll do that. And even that little bit is at least a step in the right direction, I think.
Yeah. And we were talking about everybody having different expectations, but some expectations are the same. And like you say, one of the expectations is everyone needs to look at their work again before they hand it in. Everyone can do that. And at the same time, you can have an expectation that isn't everyone needs to get at least 70%. It can be everyone needs to do as well as they can. Absolutely.
And to some extent, that is that idea, not of challenging, but of inspiring. That idea of, we talked about comparing yourself with people in the class. Well, this is a way of saying whether you're getting a level 4 or a level 8, there is something that you can do with your work to just boost it a little bit.
Yeah.
You're all in the same boat, whether you're getting a 3 or a 4 or a 7 or 8. You can all just take another look. You're all in the same boat. No one's better than anyone else when it comes to just casting an eye over and evaluating. And it's teaching that skill of evaluation as well. So it kind of, I think, ticks a lot of boxes for me. And it's relatively easy to do. Just take that moment.
I've found that the biggest motivator for someone is when they feel like they've got some momentum in an area, if that makes sense. So if a student feels like they're doing really well in something, they're more likely to do that set of studies, that homework, the night they're given it, rather than the night before they have to hand it in.
Yeah.
Because if they feel like they're really smashing that subject, I'm actually really good at this, that's the biggest motivator. But I wonder if a student who's working really hard and working to their potential and just about scraping a 3 is ever going to feel like that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm not so sure.
No, because I know I've seen students who work hard and just about scrape a pass grade. And you feel like they don't have that sort of drive, to nail the next homework and keep going and nail it again and get that dopamine hit. It can be hard because if you're doing well for you, it's all well and good saying that's great that you're doing well for you, but they know full well that they're not doing well in sort of compared to everyone, which is a shame.
Like compared nationally, for instance.
Yeah.
They know that, where you stand.
I say if someone's getting a level 4 in your subject, they are not going to be the doctor. You know?
Well, I mean, potentially, yeah. If they're getting, depending on what the subject is, um, they perhaps that shuts some doors for them.
Yeah.
Um,
If
and,
someone's
and that
getting a 4 in physics, the chances are they're not going to go to a good university to study engineering.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. That's true. Um, and perhaps to some extent, maybe university isn't the route for them. There's something to be said because I think this is one thing we haven't touched on, but perhaps we should touch on now. Do you ever find a difference between the standards and the expectations that you set for your students versus the standards and expectations that your institution or your school sets for students?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Because maybe
Um,
that's part of the breeding ground. Maybe part of the problem is for that student who's getting a 4, I'm thinking alternate ways into university or a vocational course or on the job experience or get qualified a different way.
yeah,
Whereas my institution might be thinking, we need to send these guys to Russell Group universities. It's got to look good. They've got to aim high, 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 high. And you think, well, they can be aiming high and not be aiming for university. We've got different
yeah.
expectations there.
I found that some of the most productive conversations I've had with regards to the future, with regards to courses, going to university, not going to university, have been with non-students, people I don't teach.
Mm.
You know, I play cricket at a local club, and there was one time I was talking to a lad who's quite clearly not that bright. He's a decent cricketer, you know. He's got other skills, but he's not that great at school. And he was saying, you know, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get into the college that I want to do and stuff. And he was my parents, and I think that's another grenade that we can throw into this conversation: the expectations of parents compared to the expectations of students and teachers.
God, yeah. And I found both sides of the coin. I've been sat in parents' meetings where I'm sometimes, fighting the corner of the child. Sometimes I've got them going, well, why has she not got this grade? And why has she not got that? And oh, she just doesn't work hard enough and she's not. And I'm sat there thinking, actually, you know what? Maybe she's not doing so well there because you're berating her and you're smashing that confidence. You're not inspiring, you're not motivating, you're telling her she can't do it. I'm stuck there saying, well, actually, she kicked off with me with a level 4. I've known her 6 weeks. She's up at the top of level 5. She's nearly level 6. We're 18 months away from the exam. Just chill. Just bloody settle down. It's
Yeah,
going to be fine. She can do this, but only if you believe she can do it.
yeah.
If she's going to get that kind of negativity at home, perhaps it ain't going to work. You
Mm,
know, so meet us in the middle a little bit. But equally, you get the other side of the coin where um, parents expect the world of their son or daughter, and you have to say, well, actually, with the way they're working at the moment, it doesn't necessarily look like it's working that way. Um,
yeah,
and to some extent, that you're still trying to motivate them. You're not saying you will not get a 4, or you will not pass, or you will not get the 7 or 8 that you need for college. You're kind of saying, at the moment, with what you're doing, you will not. However, the door is open. There's opportunities. Here's the help that's on offer. You're never closing the door and shutting them out. I don't think.
yeah. That growth mindset. I don't understand this yet.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Like you're working towards it. You will get it eventually. But it is a tough one, I think, to marry up the expectations of individual staff members, because straight away, the expectations of one staff member are different to the expectations of another.
Yeah,
Everything from behavior to attainment to effort to whatever, and that will differ in terms of what the institution want, and that will differ in terms of what the parents want, and that might differ in terms of what the student themselves want.
yeah. I feel like something we should also mention, and this might be a nice little segue, is expectations that are too low. And we're not often guilty of this as teachers, I don't think, the vast minority of the time at least. But I have seen it in parents, where you've sat at a parents' evening and the parent will say, "So what then? What's he like at maths?" Like, oh, at the minute I feel like he's working below the level I expect. Or, oh, he's no good at maths, just like his mum and dad.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Oh my
and
god! And like, how do you? First of all, that poor kid
yeah,
to sit there with their parents and essentially be told like this is genetic
yeah.
when
Yeah, you
it's
never
not.
stood a
This
you
yeah,
don't stand. There's nothing you can do about this because it's the way
exactly.
you were born.
Yeah, like straight away that shuts everything off. Now I'm not being funny. With the best will in the world, my parents don't know tons and tons about biology. They probably know a bit, but they're not going to be teaching it to GCSE and A-level standard and beyond. They don't got degrees in it or anything. There's no truth in that idea of like your parents can't do it, so you can't do it.
Oh no.
However, I do feel like there's a big nurture element there. So if your parents have always avoided doing A maths with you, or you've never had like little workbooks growing up as a kid, if you don't read much at home, yeah, those are things that might stifle how easy you find school life, for sure.
And how much of that, I mean, one of the biggest predictors of success later in life, this is what I've heard, is the size of your vocabulary at age 3.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And to some extent, I think that also boils down to, I mean, what I've told students in the past, what I've told people in the past, what I tell parents sometimes, but very rarely, because they'll probably shout at me, is your kid needs to read more, or you need to read more to your kid. Or if you want, this is for any listener out there, if you're about to have a child, I think you've just had a kid, I mean, you've got a son.
I have, yeah.
Exciting.
I've started trying to read with him, but bless him, he's only 7 months old, he's just trying to eat the book.
I mean, hey, it's still exposure to books, isn't it? And that's the idea. Like, if you read to your kids, they will have a better vocabulary. They will have a better grasp of words. They'll be able to put sentences together. They'll be able to communicate better. All these little things that we consider intelligence, I guess, that we consider bright students to be able to do, all stems from reading, I think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily, I guess, matter what you're reading, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, whether they're really into dinosaurs or Harry Potter or whatever it is. If they're reading, if they're exposed to it. And the other thing that it's good for isn't just better vocabulary, better communication. It's also how their brain processes ideas. So to read a book and to build that world in your head and to imagine what you're reading on the paper requires almost like a tool, like a toolkit of being able to build up abstract images.
Yeah.
Which is often, as far as education is interested, whether it's, I don't know, unseen poetry in English, or whether it's the inside of a cell in biology, you know, there's a lot of really tough stuff to visualize and wrap your head around and explore and evaluate. And if you can deal with abstract concepts and hold those ideas in your head, you're going to do a lot better than if you've never had to try that.
Exactly. You think about the number of subjects that you need abstract thinking to be able to succeed in. It's vast.
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. I would argue the top of pretty much any subject is going to require that. If you want to research new things, if you want to have new novel ideas, if you want to be creative, which is how the job market's going more and more and more, that's the skill that you're going to want, and you're going to get that by reading. And it's never too late. I to some extent, I wish more of my students read even now. I wish I had more time to read more if I could.
Yeah, I had a scary moment. There's someone I know who had a child, and they do like a 9-month test. I think it's about 9 months, where like the health visitor comes in and they do a few tests with the baby to see test things like object permanence. Have they got object permanence yet? What's the hand-eye coordination like? Things like that. And from that, they give you a very, very, very early and rough indication of whether they're more physical at that age or sort of mental at that age, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to some extent. Or I suppose that is that idea of like practical versus abstract. Yeah.
And they found that the baby was more physical at that time than they were sort of mental. You know, they weren't that high up the growth charts with regards to how they were developing mentally, you know, their intelligence and things. But at 9 months, you know, what are we talking about? And it just so happens that baby now is older than 1 year, and his favorite thing in the world is sitting down with his dad and getting him to read him a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's important not to just sign the child off, because just like we were talking about that research earlier, and again, we should link the paper. There are institutions and there are teachers and there are schools who are guilty of just writing kids off. You know, you're on free school meals, or you've got some subsidized help, or you've got, you know, you're dyslexic or whatever. Okay, written off. Got an expectation for you that's lower than everyone else.
Yeah.
There are people who are guilty of that. That's true. And it's recognizing those pitfalls and those traps and avoiding them, and not succumbing to that. So that the parents who say, oh, but, you know, he can't do maths just like his mum and his dad. Well, he can do, or she can do, or, you know, they absolutely can do any of the subjects with the right support and the right teacher and the right attitude from themselves and from home. It all kind of has to tie together a little bit. But you know, they're still growing, they're still learning, just like this kid who likes to sit down and read a book. I mean, I think about when I first went to school. So I was born in July, and my parents were terrified, as I guess a lot of new parents might be, that when I was going into reception in year 1, I was just turning 4, but I had people in my class who were just turning 5 in the September.
Yeah.
So
I'm an August baby, so I'm the same.
Yeah, you're in the same boat. So you're walking into a situation, and it doesn't sound a lot. He's just turned 4, they've just turned 5. They've had what, 25% more life than me.
Yeah,
They've
that's a
had
lot.
that's in terms of being 4 or 5 years old. That's a lot of experience. But you raise your game and you socialize and you learn skills. You're not a write off. No one's looking going, oh, August baby, they're gonna be thick. Oh my god,
It
so
is
behind.
it is interesting though, because when I was at school, I was put on the thicky table
Ah,
at
classic
primary
thicky
school.
table.
The classic thicky table that is an abhorrent thought to have in a classroom, a thicky table. And every kid who sat on that table knows that they're on the thicky table. And
Yeah,
there was
it's
especially there
horrendous.
in maths, okay, because in primary school, first of all, August baby, like you say, it took me a long time to sort of catch up. And in maths, I was always rubbish at times tables because in order to get something into my long-term memory, it just takes a little bit longer.
Mm.
It takes a little bit longer for my brain to sort of encode it. I'm currently trying to learn something in my own time, and I find it's taking so long just to encode it. But as soon as I went to secondary school and it wasn't memory based, all of a sudden maths became algebra, and it was about a skill and a set of rules and applying those rules to new things. I went from set 4 out of 6 when I started in year 7. By the end of year 7, I was in set 1.
Mm.
And it's just about the expectations of my school based on one particular aspect of what maths is at that age, then informed what table I sat at, and therefore the work that I did, and therefore what set I went into at secondary school. And I was quite fortunate, and I managed to break out of that expectations bubble. But it was touch and go at one point as to whether I would remain always telling myself I was bad at maths.
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, I still, even now, I've got that closed mindset with certain things. So languages, for instance, I've always signed myself off as being awful at languages. And I still to this day will say, oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to learn French. I'm not going to learn Spanish. Can't do it. I've not got the right brain for that. And I definitely do. It's just a complete cop out. I could sit there and do my best to learn it and practice it. It would have been easier if I'd done it, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I could force myself to do it and sit down and try and grasp it. But I've always had that expectation of myself that I just can't really do it. And I've had teachers who were happy enough to get me a passing grade, and that was kind of it.
Mm,
So I've just never been that enamored with that. I've never seen the
yeah.
point because no one's ever kind of encouraged me to see the point, really.
I was the same as well. I found it when I was at school. Languages, when I was in first year, my French teacher was my favorite teacher in the entire school. He was always cracking jokes. He was hilarious in class. French was my favorite subject. I was one of the best in the class. And then second year, I got this evil witch. I'll describe her
Oh,
as. She was not a nice person.
mm,
And I had her right up until the end of GCSEs every single year for French. And French was one of my lower grades at GCSE as a result. And I believe, again, there's a study that I've heard about. I'll try and find it and link it, that says boys have a much bigger problem doing well in subjects where they don't like the teacher, whereas girls have a smaller problem in that respect.
interesting.
Mm.
I wonder why that is. I wonder if there's a mentality, because there is a mentality. I remember having a chemistry teacher, and you go in for your predicted grade, and he sits you down, and he's kind of in his 60s and about to retire, and he's seen generations of students. He really doesn't care, and he looks at your grades. He goes, Sam, I've looked at your grades, and yeah, I'm going to predict you a B. Not everyone can get an A, and not everyone can get an A star, so I'm going to predict you a B. And to be fair, the test that I'd done wasn't great. I wasn't a great student when I was doing my S levels in my first year at college. I was pretty awful actually, and a B was a fair predicted grade. But the bit that stung me is like not everyone can get A's. Not everyone can get A's. Like if he said you're not performing as well as you can do better, but at the moment I'll give you a B. I'd probably been like fair enough. But it was almost, I don't know, just through sheer stubbornness. When I was told,
Yeah.
not everyone can get it. Like he was putting a cap on me. Like he was saying, B is the best you can do. The door is closed to you because you're too thick. I did come out with my A. I didn't get an A star, but I did get an A. And to some extent, you could argue that challenged me and that motivated me. Um, I don't know if that was his intention or not. I think a lot of teachers would then go back and kind of say, "Oh yeah, that was definitely my intention. I definitely meant to challenge him there by saying he couldn't do it, just to get the bit between his teeth." I'm not so sure if that's true. Um, But I certainly found that motivating and challenging. So maybe to some extent, some students, and it might be more girls than boys, maybe some students feel that way.
Yeah.
When
Setting
they
low
don't.
expectations almost is a bigger
Yeah,
motivator. And I think that sort of brings us full circle in a way, in that we're talking about setting high expectations which inspire, motivate, and challenge pupils. Sometimes one of the biggest motivators is putting a glass ceiling on someone,
a
saying,
little
"Don't
bit.
worry, you'll never amount to anything. This
Yeah.
subject is not for you, but don't worry, you'll get an okay grade."
And I think just to put a little conclusive kind of pin in this for the PG students who are listening out there and the teacher training people, don't evidence that as the way that you're setting high expectations. Don't whack in your folder that the way you set high expectations to motivate is by setting low expectations.
Yeah, systematically doubting all of your students.
Yeah, like you have to know them. Some students will respond to being broken down and built back up again. Some will respond to being told, you can't do this, you've got to try harder, you've fallen behind, come on, get the bit between your teeth and get it done. Some will respond to that kind of tough love approach. But I tell you what, it's probably not that many, and they probably don't enjoy being in your class, and it's through sheer stubbornness that they're going to get there, which
Yeah,
isn't necessarily the atmosphere that you want.
yeah, you're effectively you're risking, because it's not necessarily going to work. You're putting your entire relationship with one of your students on the line in the hope that they'll do slightly better. And I feel like one of the biggest things that you can do in a class is have students on your side.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you're like willing to
absolutely.
trade that in, especially if it's a 2 year course. Oh, it's going to be rocky.
It really is, especially when you think about all the other standards that you're trying to meet as well, and for regular teachers day to day. Are you going to have good behavior in the classroom if all you do is demotivate and wind up and annoy and upset your students? Are you differentiating based on their ability if you've decided they've all got the same ability, which is zero? You know, all those little things. So yeah, I will concede that for some students, you can probably be a right nuisance to them, and they will get the bit between their teeth and they'll get stubborn and they'll resent you, and that's why they'll do well. And they'll say, I had to teach it all to myself, but I did it. And they'll feel really good about that. Fair enough. Don't be that teacher
Yeah,
for
I feel
everyone.
like that shouldn't be plan A.
No, that should not be plan A. If anything, that's one of those awkward, weird coincidences that happens where
Yeah,
they come back at the end to sign their leavers book, and they're like, oh, "I really hated you, and I really didn't get it. I really had to knuckle down, and that's why." Well, good for you, great, and you probably
yeah,
didn't even notice.
yeah. Whoops.
Yeah, a little bit like, yeah, I meant to do that, when in reality, you're thinking, "Oh God, I'm awful,
Yeah.
I'm horrendous."
I'm a bad person, just way down inside.
And that's it. You can't be everyone's cup of tea. Some people just don't like tea. Um,
I
anyway,
don't
yeah,
like it.
perhaps that's a good place
Yeah.
to put a pin in it. So that's it for high expectations. Next week, it's going to be promoting good progress and good outcomes by pupils, which again ties in with a whole bunch of these. So we'll talk progress and outcomes next week. But until then, that is it. So bye bye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.